There was a time, before time itself, an instant so profound that the heavens fell silent. Angels folded their wings, and between the blazing throne and the fallen star, an eternal silence was born. It said that it was in that abyss between light and darkness that God spoke to Lucifer for the last time, not with human words, but with a whisper that tore through the veil of creation. This was not the end of a conversation, but the beginning of a mystery. A mystery that still echoes within the souls that wander between shadows and light. Today, we will traverse the invisible realms of this final exchange, and perhaps by the end, you will discover that this forgotten speech has never ceased. It still pulses, disguised, within you. The silence on the throne, when the heavens fell silent. There was a moment in the spiritual realm that cannot be measured in hours or days. It was before time as we know it, when the throne was silent, not from absence, but from intensity. It was as if the universe itself held its breath. No angel moved, no sphere spun. Ezekiel's wheels of fire stood still. There, between veils that human eyes have never dared to reach, God spoke to Lucifer for the last time, and this conversation was not made of common words, but of consciousness intertwining at the heart of being. It was not judgment, it was farewell. Lucifer, the bearer of light, did not appear as the caricature we have created. He was beauty, freedom, intelligence, and brilliance, a brilliance that reflected divine glory, until the day he wished to emit his own light. But here lies the detail that few notice. This desire was not mere vanity. It was a quest for individuation, a will to experience being outside of unity. God, who knew all possible outcomes, did not intervene. Because true freedom only exists where there is the possibility of rupture. And then, at the peak of cosmic tension, God did not shout, did not scream, did not condemn. He whispered. And that whisper was louder than any thunder, a whisper that parted the veil between worlds and marked the end of communion between the Creator and the one who had walked with him among fiery stones. This moment, described in symbolic echoes in the Zohar and apocryphal traditions, was the breaking point. From then on, silence became the new language between the two, a silence that burns like a live ember. But the most intriguing part is that this silence, though cutting, was loving. It was the kind of love that does not bind, that does not manipulate. It is the love that allows one to go. God did not cast out Lucifer in rage, but with a pain only an eternal Father can feel. He knew that the light that was drifting away would soon plunge into darkness, and yet he allowed it. Because there are spiritual lessons that can only be learned outside the light, in the cold of absence, in the crossing of the inner desert. The Holy Spirit would later teach this to many who would also become lost. In real life, perhaps you have also felt this silence. In moments of prayer when it seems the heavens are mute, in the early hours when you seek an answer and all that comes is a piercing void. But is it really absence, or is it such an intense presence that it cannot fit into words? Perhaps God still speaks this way, in silence. Maybe it is in this silence that he reveals more than in sound. Indeed, it is often in this apparent void that many find productivity, spiritual clarity, and even ideas to transform their careers and make money in alignment with purpose. Now think with me. In your own life, are you really hearing the silence of God? Or trying to fill it with noise? Comment below. When was the last time you felt that sacred silence? The sword at the threshold, the exile of the morning star. When God spoke to Lucifer for the last time, something was broken in the invisible. Not just the bond between two realms, but the very spiritual fabric of the cosmos. It was as if a rift had opened between light and shadow, a threshold guarded by a sword of fire. This sword, symbolically mentioned in Genesis after the expulsion from Eden, is more than an angelic artifact. It represents divine discernment, the separation between what still vibrates at the frequency of heaven and what has chosen to plunge into the density of the ego. When Lucifer crossed that threshold, he was not destroyed, he was transformed. The morning star fell like lightning, as Isaiah poetically writes. But the fall was not an end, it was a rite. A process of decomposition and reconstruction that resonates in all souls that have dared to stray from the source in search of autonomy. It is the same process many experience today when they decide to break away from rigid religious structures in search of a deeper, freer, authentic spirituality. However, this path comes with a cost. Like Lucifer, every soul that dares to create its own light must learn to deal with the darkness that comes with it. The sword at the threshold also manifests in our lives as crucial choices, decisions that change destinies. Sometimes it's a relationship that needs to be ended, a job that requires sacrifice, a move to a new city, or even breaking away from toxic family patterns. Each crossing demands leaving something behind, and the pain of separation, no matter how hurtful, is also a form of initiation. The exile of the morning star teaches us that sometimes being cast out from a place, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, is the beginning of our true journey. In ancient apocryphal texts and some currents of Kabbalah, Lucifer was not cast out merely as punishment, but as part of a necessary cycle for the expansion of knowledge. He became the bearer of secrets, the mysteries of matter, illusion, and temptation. But notice, even in exile, the divine spark was not extinguished, only covered. Just like you, who might be experiencing a time of spiritual distance, but still carries within you the seed of the divine. Darkness often is the womb of revelation. In practice, how many times have you felt that something in your life was abruptly, unfairly, painfully severed, but later realized that it was a disguised protection, a sword that prevented you from returning to places that no longer resonated with your soul? The exile of light doesn't have to be seen as punishment. It can be the phase where you finally learn to light your own torch. In the end, even pain becomes a teacher. Even the silence of separation transforms into an invitation to reconnect with something greater, deeper. And what if Lucifer, in his exile, was still part of the plan? What if even that which fell was deep down helping you rise? Tell me in the comments, what sword cut your path but later protected you from something you didn't yet understand? The crystal court when the Elohim diverged. Not everything in the heavens is harmonious. There are ancient traditions, preserved in the dust of the Dead Sea manuscripts and in the lines of the Zohar, that speak of spiritual assemblies where even the powers of light divide in judgment. It is said that, after the exile of the morning star, there was a court not made of marble, but of translucent crystal, a place where truth itself manifests in liquid light. There, the Elohim, creative intelligences, gathered not to punish, but to understand. And what was being judged was not just Lucifer, but the very idea of free will. Some Elohim wanted to erase him from the existential plane. Others, however, saw his fall as necessary for the balance of the great mystery. They understood that shadow, even painful, enhances the contrast of light, that without the serpent there is no Eden, that without deviation there is no return with consciousness. Lucifer then became not just the adversary, but the invisible cog that would drive billions of souls to seek, on their own, the path back. The fall revealed itself, paradoxically, as a new form of service to creation. How many times in our lives do we go through crystal courts, moments when our choices seem divided even within ourselves? One part desires immediate justice, while another cries for compassion. One wants to cut the bond, while another wants to forgive. Within each of us exists this internal council, archetypes vying for decisions, emotions clashing. What this court teaches us is that even the most difficult choices have a role in our awakening process, and that evil often is simply an unintegrated consciousness. At the center of this spiritual court, Lucifer did not respond. He was merely reflected. The judgment was, in fact, an exposure of his essence before pure light. A mirror where all could see the beauty, the arrogance, the pain, the past glory, and the present darkness. And more than anything, the hidden potential for redemption. Yes, redemption. Because even in the deepest abyss, a spark can ignite. It's the same when we look in the mirror and confront not just what we show the world, but what we hide, and still choose to love ourselves, forgive ourselves, and carry on. This court of the Elohim also speaks of reconciliation with the parts of ourselves we deem unworthy. You know that part of you that failed, that betrayed a value, that ran from a calling? What if it is not meant to be destroyed, but redeemed? What if this inner judgment is not an end, but a new beginning? True spiritual awakening does not happen when we conquer the shadow, but when we understand it and put it in the service of the light. Just as the Elohim diverged, you too can learn to harmonize your internal forces rather than eradicate them. Now think sincerely. Which part of your story are you still trying to erase, when perhaps you should be integrating it into your purpose? Comment here, what have you been judging in yourself, but perhaps it's there to guide you to your next spiritual level. The veil of smoke. When Lucifer entered time. After the rupture in the crystal court, a new dimension was imposed on Lucifer's existence, time. Before this, he was a consciousness outside the chronological line, where everything was eternal, simultaneous, pure spirit. But upon crossing the threshold of exile, he was enveloped by a dense, mutable veil of smoke, where past, present, and future became chains. Time for fallen beings is not merely a count, it is a prison. And there, in this new vibrational field, the former bearer of light began to become the lord of another thing, forgetfulness. It is at this point that spiritual mythology merges with our archetypal psychology. Because every being that strays from the source begins to lose the memory of who they are. And Lucifer, upon diving into time, began to live among the veils, moving like mist between realms, cultures, and empires. He became the spirit of seduction, doubt, and soulless science. His role shifted from reflecting divine light to attempting to produce his own, a reflection of what many humans live today, trying to shine forcefully, disconnected from their true spiritual origin. This entry into time also brought him something unprecedented, the pain of waiting. Time carries cycles, repetitions, intervals. For a being that knew only eternity, the tick-tock of matter is torture. It's like someone who had their wings ripped off and now has to walk. But it was precisely there that he began to draw closer to humanity, because no one understands better the anguish of being trapped in time than the human being. We live between deadlines, beginnings and ends, waiting for answers, going through seasons of loss, waiting, learning, just like him. In the Book of Enoch, there are veiled mentions that the fallen angels taught humans the arts of iron, enchantments, and makeup, metaphors for mastering appearance, war, and the manipulation of reality. Lucifer, now shaped by time, became not just the tempter, but the archetype of the hidden master who teaches through contrast. Every civilization he touched flourished and then fell, not due to a curse, but because they built on foundations disconnected from true light. He became then the involuntary teacher of the ego, and perhaps, in a mysterious way, he became the mirror that reveals the soul's illusions. How many times do you find yourself trapped in repetitive cycles, in emotional, professional, or spiritual patterns that repeat as if time were ensnaring you in a loop? This is the reflection of the veil of smoke, the forgetfulness of your spiritual identity. And the only way to tear that veil is to remember who you are, where you came from, and where you are returning. Because time is the testing ground, but it is not the final prison. It is merely the crossing. Now tell me, have you been living like an eternal being trapped in time, or as a temporal being awakening to eternity? Comment here. In which cycle of your life do you feel ready to cross the veil and truly awaken? The shattered mirror, the voice of God in the shadows. Even after the silence of the throne and the entry into time, something strange began to happen in the deeper spiritual realms. Some initiates claim that, now and then, fragments of God's last voice still echoed in the most unlikely places, in the shadows. As if the last conversation between God and Lucifer had left traces, shards, sound particles that lodged themselves in the recesses of the invisible. The sacred voice had not been erased, only dispersed. And each spark still pulsed, waiting for someone to dare to listen to it, even amidst the darkness. These fragments are like shards of an ancient mirror, a mirror that once reflected the face of God, but was shattered by the fall. And now, each piece shows an incomplete, distorted image, yet still divine. This is exactly how many of us feel at certain moments in life, broken, lost, distant from the light, yet still carrying something sacred within. Because even in our mistakes, even in our falls, there exists a seed of something eternal that does not extinguish. The voice of God never disappears. It merely camouflages itself within us. At this point, occultism and archetypal psychology converge. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow as an essential part of the soul, where our repressed impulses, traumas, but also our greatest treasures hide. What if the shadow is not an enemy, but a map? What if, instead of fleeing from darkness, you are called to enter it as one who seeks a shard of mirror that still reflects heaven? This is the spiritual crossing that few undertake. The journey of listening to God even when all seems silent. In practice, this translates into those nights when pain forces you to look within. When you face a personal crisis, a loss, a betrayal, or an emotional collapse, and at the bottom of the abyss you feel something inexplicable. Peace. Not the peace that comes from the absence of problems, but the peace that arises from the presence of a greater mystery. This is hearing the voice of God in the shadows, a whisper that says, "Even here I am." And just as Lucifer heard for the last time, you too can catch this frequency, even if just for a second. The Kabbalistic tradition speaks of tzimtzum, the withdrawal of divine light so that the world could have space to exist. In other words, even the apparent distancing of God is, in fact, an act of love. And perhaps the shattered mirror is this, a way for divine light to distribute itself, spreading into 1,000 forms, waiting to be reunited by those who awaken. Each part of you that was wounded, betrayed, or rejected is a piece of that mirror. Do not throw it away. Look at it, restore it. Because each redeemed fragment brings you closer to the wholeness you came to experience. And you, have you ever found God in a moment of darkness? Have you ever heard a divine whisper amidst the pain, even without understanding where it came from? Comment here. What was the darkest moment of your life when you, inexplicably, felt the presence of something greater? The impossible return, when the end resounds the beginning. What if I told you that the end of the story is also the beginning? The oldest traditions, from the Eleusinian mysteries to Lurianic Kabbalah, have always known that time is not linear, but spiral. At the darkest point of the fall, the subtle return to the origin begins. The silence between God and Lucifer, the exile, the court, the veil, and the shards, all of this may not have been a final sentence, but the start of a slow return. An impossible return in the eyes of classical theology, but inevitable in the light of the divine love that permeates all. Because even darkness obeys the cycle of light. Lucifer, the exiled one, the master of shadows, may not have ceased to be a son. Perhaps his mission was deeper than we imagined, to show the contrast, to teach humanity to desire the heavens by free choice and not by imposition. This possibility appears in veiled parables in Gnostic writings, and even in alchemical myths, where lead becomes gold, where the dragon guarding the treasure is defeated not by force, but by wisdom. It is the cycle of redemption. And if the most lost of beings can still be restored, then any one of us can too. How many times have you found yourself at a point of no return? In broken relationships, in dreams that crumbled, in phases of life where it seemed there was no more meaning. And yet, after morning, something bloomed, not as before, but as something new. This is the impossible return, the one that only happens when there are no more human expectations. And then the spiritual breaks through. The end resonates with the beginning when you realize that the fall did not destroy you. It awakened you. That the pain was not punishment, it was realignment. That the silence of God was preparation for reunion. In the Zohar, there is a subtle idea that the highest light can only be revealed after the deepest descent. It is the Or Haganuz, the hidden light since creation, which only the initiated can find. And perhaps this light is within each of us, waiting for our own story to complete a full cycle, waiting for you to understand that nothing was in vain, that every tear, every absence, every no from life was guiding you back. Back not to who you were, but to who you have always been in essence, a child of light. And so, the question that stirs returns to the beginning. Did God really speak to Lucifer for the last time? Or was that last speech, in fact, the seed of a new creation? A new cosmic cycle where even the most distant can be reintegrated, where the end is not exclusion, but reconversion. And if God's last word was not judgment but promise, a promise that transcends the ages, resonates in human souls, and fulfills itself in each individual awakening. Now tell me, which part of your story did you think was lost? But today you begin to see as part of a cycle of return. Comment here. What seemed like an end, but now you realize was the beginning of something greater. The story you have heard so far is not just about a celestial being that fell. It's about all of us, about the moment when every soul chooses between reflecting the light or trying to produce their own. The day God spoke to Lucifer for the last time still echoes. Not in audible words, but in silent choices, in the way you respond to silence, in the way you traverse exile, in the way you rebuild your pieces, because deep down, this is not a story of condemnation, it's a story of return, of redemption, of a God who allows the fall, but never closes the door to reunion. And if what was said in that last whisper was not judgment, but promise, and if the silence you feel is God still speaking, but waiting for you to listen with an awakened heart. Maybe you don't need to understand everything right now. Maybe you just need to remember that even the most distant is still remembered, and that the light that once fell can still find its way back. Now tell me, what did this video awaken within you? Comment here, in which part of this journey did you see yourself? And if this was your first time here, welcome to The Crossing.